So, today is the 19th of Adar. We are on page, if you're in I usually say the green book, but I guess it's really a black book from Rabbi Daniel Karamkin. We're on page 84, and it's paragraph 65, I believe. Is that correct, Mark?
66.
66, okay. Oh, that's right, okay. My notes kind of combine in these two sections here, so it's hard to see. So, last time we spoke, we were discussing that Aristotle's logic is a product of his environment. That consequently his beliefs are a product of his time and his setting. And the allegation here is that if Aristotle had been from the Hebrews, instead of proving logically that the universe is kadmut, is the eternal, he would have proven logically, quote unquote, that the universe is created. So here, the reason that the Kuzari, or excuse me, that the Haber is rejecting the Kuzari's question of are we not accepting logic? It's like, no, it's not that we're not accepting logic. We accept logic, and he's actually going to get into that in a little bit more detail of what that exactly means about accepting and not accepting logic. Is that logic isn't subject to belief. Logic is subject to rigorous, to application. We see the logic holds water, it doesn't hold water. And if it doesn't hold water, then you can choose to believe in something. When the linchpin of that was here, we see it in paragraph 64. Well, you don't see. I don't think you see it in the English. You don't see it in the English, but in the 64 it says, it's not that we believe in logic. We see it. If the logic is demonstrated to be true, then we follow it. We say that that's true, that it's something that holds water. So going into today, he's saying that, just to leave off in the last paragraph here, I have more people than usual, so let me just see here, 66. The last little sentence here is that if he was born amongst the Hebrews, basically, and he would have proven and I use proven in quotation marks here, the creation of the world, meaning that the world is new, and that's the way they use it, that it's hidush olam rather than kadmut. And he says that despite kadmut, and kadmut means the eternality, despite the difficulties in the logic surrounding that there are holes in the logic there, he was able to prove it logically. He would have had an easier time with something that is less hard to prove, being the creation of the world. Okay. Any comments, questions on that before we move on to today's new section, the new paragraph 66? 12. And if, like I say, like usually, if you have something, please jump in. Don't wait for me to call on you. Okay, so 66. And Kuzari asks back. Everyone can see. I'm going to make sure that everyone has. Yeah. Let's pull this up a little bit. The Kuzari asked, but how can the mind entertain an idea, meaning creation, if the opposite, through the eternal existence of the universe, has already been proven? So the Kuzari is saying, you're asking me to reject, the Greek philosophers. Remember, when we say philosophers, Greek philosophy is akin to science in these times. When we say philosophy, this is how we say science. This is science. You want me to reject a scientific argument that's been proven? How can I do that? How can I wrap my head around that? You're asking me to do something that seems crazy to me. So, like, what they say is, so this seems like you're asking me to subscribe to your belief. And we were talking before that, I need a little proof here for me to subscribe to something that is beyond my grasp. That's a belief. So he continues. The rabbi responds. The Haber responds. Amar Haber. When was this issue ever proved? When do we have real evidence for this idea that the universe is eternal, or is this something that is only our logical conclusion? And he says, "Chalila le'el, God forbid." And he responds, and this is very, very important. The Torah never expects us to believe in anything, in things contradicted by evidence or proofs. If something is true, for me to believe that it is not true, that it is false, that is a stain almost on my intellect, which is a stain on my humanity. A stain might be too hard of a word. Harambam talks about this in the introduction to his Guide for the Perplexed. I have an English edition here, and the reason I like this English edition because it uses an older English translation by Friedlander. It's not a great translation, but it has some like funny wordings that we don't say anymore. But I remember somewhere in the introduction here, in the real introduction of Harambam, not the introduction of the author, Harambam says something akin to that the world is round. It is not flat. It's not good or bad to say that the world is round or flat. It's true or false. The world is round. That is true. The world is flat. That is not true. That is a false statement. So we have to accept things that are true, and things that are true, that is demonstrated by evidence and proof. Just like the roundness of the world. No one it used to be nobody argued with that. So the Torah does, however, recount miracles. That is recounts miracles. That is departures from nature, such as new creations or the transformations of things. So we see in the Torah we have the splitting of the sea, or the water turning into blood. And that's an example of something transforming. In the prophets, we also have miracles like this, where Elisha fills up multiple jugs of oil, and so this woman can pay off her debts, and creates this oil out of nothing, it seems. So we have stories like this in the Torah. And this is here to teach us about God's wisdom and his ability to act upon his will at a desired time. Yoram, I see you have a question.
Well, it's a comment. We talked last time, but it's good to reiterate. There are two types of proofs. One is a positive proof. The world is not flat. Today you can go up in space and take pictures and prove that it's beyond any reasonable doubt, scientifically, the world is not flat. There are other things, like that God created heaven and earth in the beginning, which is what's going on way back when, and we're way out in space. There are two types of proofs. To my Chabad Rebbe, the proof is in Bereshit, because he believes Bereshit is divine. So Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'aretz. Other people among us, like me included, don't buy necessarily the book and the talking snake as absolute truth, but there is proof by the negative. Is there another way to explain the world than in the beginning, way back when in past, and infinity in space? To me, is the best explanation. There is no other way to explain it, so I buy it mathematically is through the negative. It can be A, B, or C. It can be A and B. Therefore, it must be C, unless you bring me other scenarios.
So the first one, yes. But the second one really isn't a proof. It's an accepted axiom. It's something we accept.
No.
You could say that it's something that we believe,
I better to correct you. That's
I'm sorry?
engineering and mathematically is 100% acceptable proof. If there are 5 options and 4 cannot be, then the 5th has to be true. And there are a lot of things that's the only way you can prove, because there is no AD, there are no evidence. Even radioactive analysis is questionable proof about the age of dinosaurs.
So yes, in scientific terms, proof by the negative is something, but you cannot prove God through the negative. We can describe God through the negative, but saying that there's no better explanation for the creation, that's not really a proof. That's an axiom that we have accepted. It's a belief. And at the end of the day, we were talking about last week that and this is something I'm still trying to tighten up a little bit. Harambam says le'da, that we have to know that God exists. He doesn't say le'amin, to believe that God exists.
Well, you see, the Rambam
It's a
agrees
knowledge
with
that
me.
comes from an action that we are engaging in. It's not really that we have a burhan, a solid proof to prove God. Nobody can prove God. God, you can't prove it like you can through scientific observation, through demonstration, through experimentation. This is something that we accept. There's no burhan for it, which is the Arabic word that the Kuzari and Harambam use for a solid proof of something. We can solidly prove that the world is round. That has a burhan. That's not some sort of, oh, we have an idea and it's where we've proven it. No, we have a proof for it, whether it's mathematical or through our own eyes or through seeing photographs. But yeah, so that I would say is what we say when we can't prove God exists. Here, that's what we're talking about. That if that makes sense. That like he's not here to prove to the Kuzari that God
Well,
exists.
so how do you have knowledge? The only way you have knowledge, the Rambam agrees with me and disagrees with you, and so are some of the biggest rabbis in Israel. I can tell you that. You can only know if you have a proof. Otherwise, it's a belief. And my friends would say, we know, is God good or not? It's a matter of belief. There is no proof. But the fact that there is a higher power, let's call him God, Hashem, give him any name you like, it cannot just be happening through accidents. And that's a proof to the Rambam, it's a proof to me, and it's a proof to the biggest rabbis in Israel. So I
Right.
said, I don't want to argue with you now. We'll talk about it offline.
Right, right. But what I'm saying here is that like you're getting close right here. We cannot prove to other people. We cannot prove or demonstrate God exists. Ever through our own experience, and this is what we're going to get into this. I keep hinting to this, but we're going to get into it soon. The idea of intuitive knowledge of God. That is what it means to know something, to know someone. I have this experience. The Kuzari here has an intuitive knowledge of God. He is the one who experienced the dream. He is the one who experienced the angel telling him, your actions are no good. Your heart's in the right place, but your actions are no good. So he has some sort of idea that there is this existence. The Kuzari couldn't prove that to him otherwise. He wouldn't be wasting his time with this conversation. This conversation would be past the Kuzari because he wouldn't have had the experience of this. So here, when the rabbi is saying here that when we're talking about proof and evidence here, is that the eternality of the world is not proven scientifically. It's a logical conclusion, and there's a difference between a proof and a logical conclusion. Our belief in God, you could also say, is a logical conclusion of what we've experienced and what we have seen and what we know. Our beliefs are a summation of our collective experiences, so to speak, in Am Yisrael. So here he's saying the Torah wouldn't ask you to believe in something that's contrary to something that's proven. That would be insane. So therefore what he's saying is that this creation, the eternality of the universe is not something that's proven. It's something that we're asking you to accept as a logical conclusion from Aristotle. Aristotle wasn't at the beginning of the universe. Well, even if he was, he would say he wasn't because the universe had no beginning. So therefore he can't say this is how I saw it, this is how I experienced it. He's just telling you this is my logical conclusion to how we got here. So the rabbi is saying, God forbid, we would never expect, the Torah would never expect a person to believe in something that his own eyes tell him is not true. Because then they would make a mockery of the Torah. So when he brings here the idea, the Torah does give us miracles and transformations of things, of the water into blood. What's the point here? Why is the Torah bringing this? It's in order to teach about God's wisdom and his ability to act upon his will at a desired time. And what does that mean for us? It means that, actually, you know what? Let's just follow the text. It'll tell us what it means in a second here. In these little parentheses right here are not in the Hebrew. It is not true that the eternal existence theory has already been proved. That's not what the Haber says here. I think he's just trying. The editor is trying to just break up the paragraph a little bit more to make it flow better in the English here. So the Haber continues after saying that there's miracles. The Torah brings that there are miracles in the Torah. The question as to whether the universe was created or has always existed timelessly is a deep one, and there are valid logical arguments that could be made for either side. A logical argument based from what I can see, what I'm measuring, that's up to, and also my experience as well. Logic is also based on your experience and the language you speak. Therefore, what tips the scales in favor of creation? So if I could logically say both things are true through logic, why is the Haber saying, why do I choose to believe in the creation rather than the eternality? And before we get to that, there is this concept here of logic can get you almost anywhere. Rationalization can get you anywhere. In the Gemara, I think I mentioned it last week, but I might have mentioned the wrong number, because it's actually, there's 150 ways to say that a rat is a kosher animal, and there's 150 ways to prove that it's not kosher. There's a nice little thing. It says and that you can prove through logic. Oh, because it's this and that. There are many ways you can prove things, and we see, the argument of great rabbis have said some things like there's rabbis who will come to their own logical conclusion based on their experiences and the reading of the text, but it might not be in line with the tradition of the Torah or the teachings of the rabbis. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that they're valid arguments. Especially today, when we don't have a tradition regarding something, you have to make a logical argument in order to say that it's permitted or prohibited. And that's why it's really hard harder today for us to get our minds around what is the difference between our logical approach to Torah versus a traditional, quote unquote, received approach to Torah. But here we're going to see that we need both the logic and we're going to need both the tradition in order to really form a balanced approach, a yin and yang, if you want to say. You need both. You can't just approach it from a purely logical point, because your logic can lead you wherever you desire your logic to lead you. And you really can't just say, oh, it's only tradition. It's only tradition. That's only the thing we rely on. Because, like we were talking last week, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. That's our tradition. But we need to see further, and that's our logic. We need to balance the both together. So here, what makes it that I accept Hidush HaOlam, the creation of the world, rather than Kadmut HaOlam? It's the weight of tradition plus logic. Therefore, what tips the scales in favor of creation is a tradition that dates from Adam to Noah and down to Moshe's prophecies, that is undoubtedly more reliable than logical arguments. So who was there? If Aristotle wasn't there, who was there? Moshe Rabbeinu, through his Nevuah, was there. God told him how it looked. Noah was closer to all these events. Adam was the first person there. He was told all these things. And it's not meant to say that... it's not meant to say, how do I say? It's a lot more nuanced than the simple reading here. When something is unprovable, is basically, such as the eternality of the universe, what we do as Jews, we err with it as well. But if something comes up as other, we have to. Oh, okay, hold on. Am I back now?
Yep, you're back.
Okay. All right. So saying here, this happened last week, so I apologize as well. But if we are something scientifically, again, I'm lost. Okay, better now, more or less.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Library Lucena. Okay, that should be a good one. Okay. Good?
Yep.
All right. It's the internet waves. Sometimes, there's a tidal wave. Sometimes the tide goes out.
Is that logic or belief?
That's a belief. So if we have something scientifically that we're unsure about, and when I say scientifically, something we can observe with our eyes, test with our knowledge, experiment, get ideas about, and it's not conclusive, he's seeming to be saying here we side with we side with our tradition. We combine the more of the tradition to absorb the other parts of the logic. But if something is proven, and there's no there's no two ways about it, we should be going with the logic here, because the Torah would never force us to believe something that is logically inconsistent, or excuse me, logically disprovable, scientifically provable. So there's examples today of, I guess the most famous example would be the theory of evolution. And people say it's absolutely forbidden for an Orthodox Jew, or for a believing Jew, we should better say, to believe in the theory of evolution, because it's contrary to a Torah. And then you will have others who say, look, it's not forbidden to believe in the theory of evolution. I don't believe in the theory of evolution because I think it's logically flawed. That would be a better approach. But even that, some of the arguments that are used against the theory, oh well, it's not falsifiable, or there's too much. We're saying that people come from monkeys and things like that, and that's impossible. And it's a purposeful misunderstanding of what the theory of evolution is in order to dismiss it as something that's silly. Of course, people didn't come from monkeys. I mean, monkeys also didn't come. Monkeys and people are from according to the theory, have a common ancestor. Not that we're the same thing altogether. If people came from monkeys, they wouldn't be monkeys anymore. That's the whole theory of evolution. And even if that's very simplified. And even if that's the case, there are two basic theories. There's macroevolution and microevolution. And nobody can deny microevolution, that the environment impacts a certain species. Even within the same generation, you can see that if one squirrel lives on this side of the valley, and this squirrel lives on the other side of the valley, and on this valley there are acorn trees, and on this valley there are walnut trees, they're going to develop different hands that are better adapted to break apart whatever walnut they're holding. And we saw this, I think we even mentioned this maybe we didn't mention this. We did not mention this before. There's a Gemara where Hillel is taking a bath before Shabbat. And somebody bets somebody else that he can make Hillel get very upset. So he comes to Hillel, and he Hillel, come down here. I need to ask you a very, very important question. He runs down, and he's in his robe and his, whatever, he's dripping wet from getting out of his bath. He's like, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? He's like, why do people in Asia have slanted eyes and things like that? And all kinds of questions, mostly about people's physical appearances in different places. Why in this place are their feet flat? Why in this place are they tall? Why in this place are they short? And all of Hillel's answers has to do with their environment. Well, because of this, I'm not saying that we accept those answers today, that there's probably more accurate answers. He was doing with the best what he had. But what he's saying there is that, we see that there are changes in people that placed on where they are. So that you could say is a bit of an evolution. And the other thing that people say against the theory of evolution, it's only a theory. It's only a theory, it's not a law. And the problem with that also, and I will admit, I am not as scientifically literate as I am demanding we should all be. I demand that, Talmidei Chachamim, all Jews should be scientifically literate in a very important way. That we should know what we're talking about when we say it's only a theory. Because when we say it's only a theory, what you're doing is you're showing that you don't understand what a theory is. You're thinking a theory is like a hypothesis rather than a general explanation for the world around us. And a theory is something that's been proven, so to speak, but it's not like a law, like this happens all the time. It's more of a general sense. At least that's my understanding. So when you see a rabbi saying, it's only a theory, therefore it's not really proven, they're not even really understanding what a theory is, really. And it shows the lack of how they're not approaching this in an honest, intellectual, logical way. And that's what the Kuzari is saying here. We approach things honestly, intellectually. We examine things when they need to be examined. We reject things when they need to be rejected, and we accept things when they need to be accepted. what I'm asking you, the Haber is saying to the Kuzari, I'm not asking you to believe in something wild or crazy. I'm showing you that what you might already believe is equally as wild and crazy. And there's really no legs for it to stand on in a real burhan, clearly proven way. But what we can say is that because we have a Kabbalah, a tradition, and not the tradition of Fiddler on the Roof, where you just do things because that's what they did before you. Tradition meaning something that we have received in a direct way. Like remember we talked last week, we said that Kabbalah is related to the Arabic word Qibla, to face something, to understand something head on, face to face. It's something that we receive face to face. And this is also what I think what Harambam is saying, lida, like you should know, you should be realize. It's not, don't accept my word for it, says the Rambam. Don't take what the Talmud says for granted and say, oh, the Talmud says it, therefore it's true. Go out and investigate on your own as well what is true and what is false. The Rambam is telling you that there are galgalim, that there are spheres in the heavens, and that there are retrograde for the stars. And this is all based on Ptolemy. When we have since thrown out Ptolemy as the epitome of what it means to have astronomical knowledge, we've accepted we rejected geocentric. So is everything that Rambam is saying here is false and a lie, and he's trying to no. What he was saying was true for its time, in its context, with its science. But now we have a different science. We have a new understanding. We have a broader understanding, we could say. We see further than Rambam did. So we're duty bound to accept the things that we can see with our eyes, and to try to understand Rambam's logic through that now, and the Torah's logic through that, rather than just blindly believing in whatever it is we're told. The idea is that Emunah isn't a blind faith here. Emunah is something that I've come to one conclusion here, and I have the Kabbalah telling me or accepting that I've accepted from my ancestors, and I'm going to weave together a new understanding, and that is how I know about something. And that's what the Kuzari is saying here. Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
That's what's being said to the Kuzari by the
Yes, by the Chacham, yeah. And it's not that he's trying to prove God. You really cannot prove God. You cannot prove something that God exists, nor can you prove God doesn't exist. It's not something that's within the realm of, I think at least, it's not something within the realm that's of proof. I had a teacher who taught me that if there's a rabbi coming to you and saying, I can prove to you that God exists 100% and that this and that is true, he's not really. It's more of a parlor trick. It's more of a nice little a logical game rather than an actual proof. It's not really a burhan. You can't really have a proof for that. And I think we've mentioned that time and time again. And it's important to understand, like, the word proof in English, that's proof. Proof is proof is proof. I don't think there are multiple words for proof. But in Hebrew, you have raya, you have other types of proof. The Kuzari here is using, the book, I mean, is using burhan, raya, mofet, the different ways that we're using proof, different types of proof. To understand with our minds that not every proof is created equally. Okay. Tov. Let's move on. Here, let me just put everyone to the side. Yes, mutations of viruses, exactly. Those are forms of microevolution. They're changing. Until now, okay. So in the second, we're on now page 86. We're still in the same paragraph, but we're in the sub-paragraph, I suppose, now. Here also, the editor puts in a little paragraph. Hold on. It doesn't seem to. It's in brackets here. It doesn't seem to be here. Yeah, it starts later. It starts after note 61, the Hebrew paragraph. Let's read the English paragraph, anyways. Until now, however, I have been addressing only Aristotle's belief in eternal existence. Other philosophers, while still believing in eternal existence, nevertheless believe that the universe, in its current shape, was shaped from some primordial matter at some point in history. Okay. The footnote says that this is the Platonic model of creation, and it's discussed in the Moreh Nevuchim. This is the idea of primordial materials, meaning the universe that we have isn't eternal, but there were materials that had always existed, And God used those to form the universe as we see it today. Let's see here. Is there any? I see there might be a question in chat. Yeah, that's another thing about yeah. I see that. I'll address that later. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the primordial materials. That there are. I don't know how to say it. Like there is some sort of homer, which is kind of some sort of clay that the potter forms, and he makes a new item. That's the idea that the Platonic forms and shapes are getting into. The idea of the Platonic forms, I think, um, somewhat exists in a lot of mystical aspects of Judaism, and I think we're going to kind of weave together both of these things right now. And this is very interesting, and this is something that a lot of people might not, if you were to say what Yehuda Halevi is about to say here today, they might say you're a heretic and you don't believe in the Orthodox approach to Judaism, and this isn't the way Jews ever approached. But here, not only Yehuda Halevi approaches it this way, but Harambam approaches it this way also, and other people, I think that even Bakuda approached it this way, but I could be mistaken, so don't quote me on that. But he says here, regarding the above point of the primordial forms, were a Jew of faith to believe in some primordial matter that God used to create the current universe, and that this primordial matter had been used previously to create other universes as well, this would not contradict, or this would not constitute a defect of faith. Ultimately, he would still believe that this world had been created at some finite time, and that humankind stemmed from the first people, Adam and Hava. So what he's saying here seems to be a new thing. Aristotle is saying that the universe is eternal. And the Torah is saying, no, it's created. There was never anything, and now there is something. And here we have a third.
I think this is Plato with the primordial stuff.
Exactly. And here he's incorporating this Platonic idea into Judaism and saying, okay, fine, you believe that there were primordial forms. You're not a heretic. You don't think that the universe was eternal. We could get into other philosophical questions. Well, then who created the primordial forms? They exist eternally with God. Does that mean that we are panentheists, that the material is sort of like God, and we kind of live in the middle of this godly realm? Like, what is it? There's a whole lot of philosophical questions that I have no idea how to answer. But I think those are some important questions that we should ask when we see something like this. I would like to point out, this is not the last time this appears in Jewish thought. I think at the very beginning of this series, we discussed a prophet. What do you call a prophet? A philosopher, I should say. We discussed a philosopher named Appleton. Appleton was a student of Socrates, but according to Jewish tradition, I think Appleton was a student of Yirmiyahu, of Jeremiah the prophet. Yeah. And when I say according to Jewish tradition, you can find it in the Me'am Loez. You take it with a grain of salt. I've had a teacher of mine called the Me'am Loez, the Johnny Carson of Jewish writings. It's really entertainment. It's not a serious book. I mean, there's a lot of important things in there, but it's really more for entertainment. People didn't have television, so they wrote the Me'am Loez instead. Fine. But here he's saying, Appleton, I mean, also kind of entertained this idea of the primordial matter existing, and that the creation, that God took the creation and created this new world, this new universe. And that's why you might have things from previous incarnations of the universe mixed into our universe. And he wasn't referring to dinosaurs. He had no idea dinosaurs existed. But I think people in the Jewish world who have subscribed to this ideology, they go, yeah, that explains the dinosaurs. That explains why the universe is 15 billion years old. What we're seeing is the background radiation of previous universes. Fine. What the Haber is saying here, and what Yehuda Halevi is saying through the mouth of the Haber, is what we believe is sort of based on who we are. And Judaism isn't really asking a lot, isn't very strict. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but I'm going to use it anyways. Judaism is more flexible when it comes to belief than you might think. That's what I would like to say. that Judaism is going to say in the Torah, the holy book, that this world was created in 6 days. And I think, well, there was a primordial material, and the universe is 15 billion years old, and that does not my belief does not contradict what the Torah says, and I'm using the Torah as a basis for my new belief. It's sort of this idea of combining the logic and combining the tradition and putting it together to make a new idea here. And there wasn't a chacham, a Jewish chacham, aside from not Appleton, who was not Jewish, but a Jewish chacham named Rabbi Levi ben Gershon. He is called Ralbag in the Hebrew, like Ramban, Ralbag. He's called Gershonides in Greek, and Ralbag is a very interesting thinker. He's actually been very much maligned by the modern Jewish world, put into harem almost because of the things he says. There's a very famous story in the book of Joshua where they're fighting at Ai. The Israelites are fighting the Canaanites at Ai, and the sun stops in the sky. And the Israelites are able to beat the Canaanites because the day is longer and they didn't have to go into Shabbat, all these things, all the twists and turns we use to understand the story. Gershoni says something very amazing about that story. He says, it's just an expression. It's just this way of saying that the Israelites moved very fast. They moved quickly. It's as if to say that the sun stood still in the sky. It's like if you were to say, yeah, he was moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. Of course, he wasn't moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. The whole world would explode if someone were to move 1,000,000 miles an hour. It just means that he was moving very fast. So here, Gershonides, Ralbag says, the sun didn't actually stand still. That's not how miracles work. Even though, he doesn't, we do seem that there are supernatural things here. But all he was saying here, they're quoting a book called Sefer Yesharim, and it's an ancient book. It's a book of poetry, and they wanted to be a little more poetic at this point. And we see that this book, Sefer Yesharim, is quoted in other places. We see it quoted when Saul dies and David is lamenting Saul. He's quoting from the Sefer Yesharim, and it's a poetic book. So we can see that that's what Ralbag is saying here. So Ralbag, we can see a little bit of taste of what his mentality is like. He says that this is how the universe was created. And we can see that the Spirit of God hovers above the waters. We can even see it in the text. The Spirit of God hovers above the waters, and that seems to show that there's a primordial form, and then Vayhi, or then God says, let there be light. So there's something that existed, Ruach and water and all these things that existed before the initial act of creation. There are other things he said, so for whatever reason, he's been kind of written out of our text, of our library, unfortunately. There was a man, you might know him, the Maharal of Prague. He said that a belief in such a thing is to believe such a thing overturns all of the beliefs of the Torah, and I think that's why in the modern world people distance themselves from him. But here I see something very beautiful, very interesting, and something that I think is lost in the nuances of a lot of discourse surrounding belief and proof and faith and science and all these things. And I think it's something that we picked up from the non-Jewish world, and something that we need to reject. I don't think that if what is his name? Darwin. If Darwin had come up with a theory of evolution in a Jewish context, there wouldn't have been the monkey trial that they put him on trial and tried to say all these things and try to disprove him. I think they would have understood him in a different light. So here we see that we're not asking you to believe something that is beyond your capability. If you can't logically get there, you can even adopt other ideologies that help you to get to the point where you see the Kabbalah and the logic as kind of forming a good symbiotic relationship that explains it well for you. And that's okay. You're not lacking, you're not a bad Jew, you're not anything, you're not some sort of heretic or non-believer. And the idea that we have rabbis who came along later and said the opposite of what the Kuzari is saying here shows how much we've absorbed and lost of our own thought process and absorbed from other people. This idea that there are primordial forms, it can be wild for us today, but today you could say, take the Big Bang. What caused this Big Bang? Was there something before the Big Bang? And it's hard to conceptualize, at least for me, it's hard to conceptualize what nothingness looks like. Is it black? No, it's not black, because black is a creation of light and the absorption of light. So it wasn't black, so it wasn't white. That's also a creation of light. What does nothingness look like? It's neither white nor black nor gray. It's no color you can think of. It's not even a color. It's not even anything. And that's hard for me to get my mind around. So how do I approach it and how do I get into it? That's something we should all ask ourselves and examine. How do I understand the psukim, Bereshit bara Elohim? And not to be alienated from your own text just because it seems like the text is silly. And that's, I think, you find a lot of Jews today who feel alienated from the text because they accept axioms of the Western world rather than having their own relationship with the text. The text is something we received as a people, but we also receive the text individually. And we're supposed to have our own relationship with that text, to be darash in that text, to examine that text, to explore it and make sense of it on our own self. And yeah, and I think I've mentioned this 100 times, but I like it a lot. And this is why I mention it a lot. This is why the Torah doesn't have vowels, or why it doesn't have stops, or why it doesn't have the Te'amim HaMikra in the scroll itself. Because once you put all those things in, you're telling me this is how I have to read it. But if you leave all those things out, it's creative. You're more creative. It's like jazz, so to speak. Yeah, of course, there is a way that it is read that we all agree on. That's of course, that's an accepted thing. But the idea that we have agency to look into the text and understand it ourselves and say, now I have a relationship now I have this knowledge of God, even though I've never met him or anything like that. I'm knowing from this own tradition and from my own logic, I'm making a new point of view. And that's what the Kuzari is saying here. Not that you have to accept some sort of orthodoxy, and that's why there's a whole problem with the word orthodox. It's a Christian term about belief and how we believe. It's not accepting orthodoxy. It's accepting the materials, the primordial, the materials of the text and the materials of your logic, and then creating something out of nothing, creating something new. Just like Kadosh Baruch Hu did when he took the primordial spirits of the world and he created the universe that we have today. That's what we have here. Yoram, go ahead.
Yeah, we talk many times, but it's good to reiterate how the humankind was created 60 billion years, monkeys or not, is interesting at best, but is relatively irrelevant to our Mount Sinai experience. We as Jews, if we buy the Mount Sinai that Moses came back from God, then the rest of our daily life is the same. And I like this evolution. This fifth grade kid comes home and asks his father, we learned in school about evolution. I asked mother, and she's from Poland, and she said that we came from the monkeys. The father is a Moroccan Jew. He said, your mother talks about her side of the family, our side of the family was created in a different way.
I've heard that before. That's funny. Yeah. When we approach these scientific points, we do it from the point of view of Sinai. And it's actually very interesting. You say everything before Sinai is irrelevant. We see that when it comes to mitzvot, that's definitely true. Why do we do Brit Milah? Why do we not Gid Nashe? Not because in Bereshit it says do Brit Milah, or we culturally don't Gid Nashe, because it was reiterated at Sinai. We do Brit Milah and we don't do Gid Nashe. It was also commanded that we're supposed to put blood on our mezuzot on Erev Pesach. We don't do that every year. And it's funny, there are some missionary groups who pose as Jews, and they say that we do Jewish things and we're fulfilled Jews. They do put blood on their door, not actual blood. They paint it like red or put red streamers on their door on Passover around Easter time. But that's not a mitzvah le'olam. It's not just because something we did once upon a time doesn't mean it's a mitzvah forever. A mitzvah is something that comes from Sinai, from Mount Sinai itself. So even our traditions are something that we accepted and explained at Mount Sinai. Mark, I see I might have said something.
Yeah, this may not be the time, but I'd like you to apply the same questioning, logical, philosophical rigor to Sinai.
Okay.
We've said that the Torah doesn't ask us to believe something that has been unproved.
Very good. Very good. I think you can. This also applies, I think, to the Exodus from Egypt, because I think many
Yes.
scholars today will say the Exodus from Egypt never happened. It's a myth,
Or that it was a small band of Levites.
or a small band of Levites, whatever it was. I haven't heard that one before. I'll have to look into that. That sounds interesting. Um, um, I think, and this could be apologetic. You can accept it, you can reject it. This could be when it comes down to it's hard to disprove something that we say happened. You really can't. If we say it happened, it's hard to disprove that it did not happen. Um, we can say that it's unlikely. There's not a lot of evidence to support it, but we still have the Kabbalah that this happened here. So since we have that Kabbalah and it was passed on from this person to this person to this person to this person, we say yes, this is something we accept. Now, I might have last week said no, it's not something we believe, it's something that we know. And you brought up that point, and I think I concede. Yes, it is something we believe. It's something we believe, and we have that's something that I like. The teacher of mine would say it's an axiom that we accept, like in mathematics. We accept certain things are this way. That way we can do the math. So this is something we accept as well. I don't have a proof for it. I don't have a historical record for it outside of our own what we said happened. So that's what we apply to there. Now I'm sure that we could get into much more. There's a haber I have in my a Beit Midrash I'm a part of, who has, according to him, has proven archaeologically that the Exodus of Egypt did happen, and his whole crux of his argument is that archaeologists are looking in the wrong time period. If you were looking for proof that World War II happened in 1985, you would also come up with no evidence. You would say, oh, well, there's no World War II. Well, you're just looking too late. Look in the right time, you will find all the evidence you need. And he has a lot of steles and Egyptian documents that seem to match up. And if I have time next week, maybe I'll bring one of the steles that he brings, where he talks about Egypt lying in ruin, and Israel doing this and that. And it's a very interesting Egyptian stele. It's a what do you call a stele in English? No, it is in English, but what do you call it? It's like what's the Washington Monument? It's a obelisk. It's an obelisk and has like this epic poem on it, and it comes from the Pharaoh Ahmoshe or Ahmose, and Ahmose was the pharaoh during the time of the Exodus. And there are people who say no, we don't say that. We have always, a tradition has said that Ramses is the pharaoh that was there. So what do you do when your scientific proof proves the Torah, but your tradition disproves the Torah? So I don't know what to do in that situation. But maybe it would seem that in this case the science would overrule what we say is our tradition regarding who the pharaoh was. Yoram.
Yeah, I'll answer Mark differently. The Mount Sinai description is less relevant to our life as is the Torah man-made by a smart manipulator or God-given by a higher being. Let's call the higher being God. Esha Torah goes through a very rigorous few months work. And many scientists that I met went through that. I never bothered. I went for a day and I thought it's kind of interesting. But, they say no smart manipulator would say that the seventh year would be you shouldn't work the land. In year 6, you'll get a 3x for year 6, 7, and 8. A manipulator would say don't work in 7 years, save like Joseph a little bit every year. That's just one example that got my interest. And there are many more, and I never took the 3 months, but smart scientists went through that process. And again, it's a mathematical proof that a smart manipulator would not come with stupid thing about kashrut. That if you find that another animal is like a pig, that is an exception, you disprove the whole dogma. And there are more of those proofs, but it's a different conversation.
Nice. Thank you. Any other comments, questions, I think concerns? I think we'll end here today unless there's anything else anyone has.
Are we at the end of this paragraph, Joseph?
We are at the end of the paragraph, yeah. The next
Okay.
paragraph is paragraph 68. Oh, I'm sorry. I looked like I didn't push it up the right way. There we
Right,
go.
okay, good enough.
So we're at paragraph 68.
Yep.
Any questions, thoughts? Tov. All right. Like I said, the what do you call it? The hametz